Welcome to the panel, where we are going to talk about succeeding or failing. Our guests, two well-renowned ecologists and also a scientist for politics. I'd like to introduce my guest to my left, and he's very well known. This is one of the economic wise persons from the expert committee. Yeah, somebody told me to speak up. So he's the chairman of this expert committee, Mr. Clemens Fuest. Then two economists in Munich, and you know that Mr. Fuest is the head of the IFA Institute in Munich, and also, and this is on my right, Professor Abberg. He is also a political scientist in Amsterdam, responsible for transnational climate governance and policies. And on the right, Professor Simon. He is a professor for public right, European right, and also international law in Marburg. He is a member of the European Parliament, and congratulations, he's the chairman of the Committee for Constitutional Questions and Issues. So this is really a well-renowned panel, so to speak. So we are going to talk about the success or the failure of climate change, how to adapt. You have to you must want it, and you must be able to do it. All right, let me start with a well-known philosopher, Mr. Sloterdijk. He wrote a book 2 years ago, The Role of the Prometheus. And we shouldn't have accepted this gift. We are all pyromaniacs. And he ends this saying, firefighters of all countries unite. So Peter Sloterdijk really detected his green soul, and this is something which we are not being born with. You have to work on it, you have to develop it. No change is outside without internal working, interpretation or working on things. Now, what about you? The kids, an epiphany in your everyday lives, a conference. So what brought you closer to this topic to say, yes, you must want it. It's a matter of attitude, and Gernot really said it, the mindset. Now, how did your mindset open up? Maybe you've born like this, but nevertheless, it might have been your personal way to becoming a firefighter. Well, you see, I'm a very rational person, and I approach it using an economical view. They find out climate change costs us a lot of money. You see floods in the Ahrtal. We see the drought in Sicily. And, the harvest destroyed. Animals are dying because they can't get any food. So you see costs everywhere, and they are not, say, reduced to any cost for the climate change. No, people say, yes, there's something. And so you ask yourself, what's more expensive? To work against climate change, or to suffer climate change, or simply get used to the fact that we have to handle it somehow. So I can say in Germany, we're living quite well. In Bavaria, things are getting warmer now. You might start growing wine, not any beer. But this is not an alternative somewhere else. And, then you look at people whose island is just, sinking away. And truly, to feel emotions that one side, but I should say I use a very sober approach. What's the cost? What's the benefit? And the conclusion is we have to do things. And then, of course, the ecologists come on stage saying we have to do things, but how? Okay, who's going to bear the costs? That, of course, is something which we're going to discuss maybe later. All right, I admit, for me, my kids, opened my mindset. I don't know, what is your access when it comes to adaptation to climate change or climate problems? Well, actually, it's politics. I didn't I thought about a lot of things, and it has been that topic or that issue during the election campaign, and then it became the central focus of Ursula von der Leyen said that this is the Green Deal, and then of course this was then included in legislation. And over the last 5 years, we have done or followed or pursued some policies which will have an effect in 5 years' time only. So I can say we looked at many things. We looked at many issues. We found out that, islands are just subsiding. If you will have, say, a connection to the topic issues, if you talk to people directly affected. Also the perception, what people feel, what they sense. Now, as an economist, open for, say, figures and numbers. And Monica said that this was a rational decision to open up. But what about you? Your mindset, maybe your mindset has always been like this. Maybe you changed. When did you open up? When it comes to climate change. I must say my first response was, that's something which I do not really want to present because it's really impolite to give this or that opinion. Now, why am I saying this? The entire debate, you see, climate protection, there are so many people who've got some kind of personal relationship with climate protection or protecting our environment. Now, the problem is, you see, and this might be a trend as human beings, that we always try to focus on things that we can influence. But I believe for us it is important to think of what every one of us is doing. Let's say we live in Europe. We've got an emission trading system, and because of personal opinions, I say, okay, I'm going to emit less CO2. So as long as I move within this CO2 trading system, the emission rights or the credits, distracting from the systemic issues will lead to the fact that things will become more expensive, and that we will not be able to handle everything. Now, that was my spontaneous idea, and of course that's not an appropriate answer. So let me use a different approach. For an economist, this is something really very special, this climate problem, because it is the largest failure of humankind. It is a gigantic, an enormous resource nobody really handles properly. It isn't owned by someone, and what you don't own, you use and waste sometimes. Many people are involved here, but this, is a global problem. And this means the largest problem we have, who is going to protect this resource? Nobody's got an incentive to do that. You always have the incentive to rely on others doing things. But so you might say that this is the largest or greatest market failure of mankind. Now, as an economist, and there might be one thing which doesn't work and will not work, then it is climate protection. Simply because of the fact that really so many people are riding on the coattails of somebody else. Or in other words, it is the big challenge for us, for those in politics, in science, because of these major problems. And at a first glance, I can say it looks like impossible to find ways and trajectories. You said that this should be our homework, and so I'm always thinking about how we can improve matters. Philip, please. So this sounds like therapy on this stage. I ask myself, how honest shall I be? I've always been, interested in environment. You see, 10 years ago, I've had a radio program. I always, showed new songs, German songs at the time, and it was all about beetles, that particular song, and a beetle being chased out of a forest. And I must say, this really hurt me as a 19-year-old guy. So then I wanted to write my MA thesis at the Bonn University, and in 1997 the Kyoto Protocol was adopted, and I said I'm not going to do anything anymore because problems seem to have been solved. But then, I wrote my MA about international relations, but I found out that the problem has not been solved. And therefore, I started thinking about why things are like they are and what we can do in order to solve the problem. Now, let me ask you, so we talked about commitment, and you are thinking about international, transnational relations. Now, is there anything that might be, say, a good starting or talking point here? Well, Gernot, the positive spin, all that we heard, I think it is necessary to point out that this is really a big issue, an enormous market failure. But nevertheless, I can say that lots and lots of things are being done, more so than is perceived in general. Many things were mentioned. China, the largest polluter, will have, say, peak emissions much sooner than thought. In the United States, you said 2 weeks ago, miracles might happen. You might say, okay, you can forget about everything, but you should never give up. Europe, lots of things have happened. And I should say legislation has been brought on the way, so 32.5% of emissions have been reduced since the 90s, and I believe things are working out. Maybe not super or great, but nevertheless things work. The last example, I come from Bonn, and between the big climate conferences, we always have some kind of intermediate meeting where people meet between these conferences. And here, people discuss various issues like COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. We discussed this already. And my opinion is clear. There are lots of problems. But those, the professionals, those working on an international stage know what's at stake. And here we have to have this ambition that all our say intentions have to be directed at solving this problem. Do something. And we must make sure, and I think it is like this, despite all these geopolitical distortions, the overall situation in terms of climate change is more or less stable. So I can say at the end of the day, I'm quite upbeat, quite optimistic about these things. So when we heard Gernot Wager's presentation, this optimism, do you share it? Moderation, holding back, and of course you want to have fun, and then there are bans, and then there are commandments, things like this, or directives, whatever. The perspective of this expert council, what can you get out? Push and pull and dispensing with this or that, holding back, moderating things, and fun. What are your deliberations? As an economist, you think about the market behavior, and here we can say that we've got a negative externality. That is the classical way of handling things. That's price, the CO2 tax that we are talking about at present, or, the certificate price. This is something which we discussed. Now, what will be the right way forward? Indeed, we have to make sure that the price is so high that it will trigger things. The other variation, and this is being chosen when you want to create truth fast, because this is what it is all about. People really want to know, what is this all about? And then we have to solve a coordination problem, because there might be some kind of ban, the ban on ICE-powered cars. So can we have something like this? Well, I should say we have to cause all players to reposition themselves. The manufacturers, for instance, sooner or later will not be allowed to sell any ICE-powered cars. Then there are the buyers. They know there will not be an ICE-powered car around anymore, and this means we are going to have electric cars, and this means I have to get used to that slowly, and maybe make sure that I've got a wall box at home for charging. We need charging stations, we need green power, we need the respective performance, etc., infrastructure. All this will work out when people will know that at this time things must work. But if I introduce kind of uncertainty, what did we experience over the last few weeks and months? Who is responsible for this or that? then of course this will not reassure people, and everyone will think, okay, we will see things or have to see things in a different way. Investment, that has been changed, and that of course is the current development. I have to shift my investments to something which is not necessarily purely, say, electric. All right. When thinking about this ban, people, that's my most favorite toy. I want to have this ICE powered car. This is not what it is all about. You see, it's not like I'm dispensing with something. We have to use this approach. I am getting something new. And most of us, I believe, most of you have been driven or were or have been driving these electric cars. That's nice. It's really fun, driving such a car. And they're very, very, very quiet, really great cars. And I don't know whether I really want to continue driving my old car because everything else is right. The infrastructure is all right. The charging stations are there. So I can charge my car wherever I want to charge it. Now, the question before that is, with our old technology, we haven't really made progress. The old technology, is no longer, say, very advanced. Cars became larger, cars became heavier, and emissions in the transportation sector over the last few years have not gone down. You see, they account for 20% of the greenhouse gases. Nothing has changed in this respect. And I should say, we will have problems, calculating costs. We had a look at this. Battery electric trucks, for instance, and that's foreseeable. In very foreseeable times, these trucks will be more cost effective than diesel trucks. So it is not only about dispensing with things because it's more expensive. No, of course, we need startup investment, but at the end of the day, things will not be more expensive. So it's talking about mindset. We need a mindset telling people that every change involves a positive development, and this is something which everyone has to understand. Oh, there's lots and lots of psychological aspects in what you said. You see, I am innovation ecologist and economist. I'm really happy about each and every economical improvement, and here you see how immense, how infinite the possibilities and chances are. And the fun, dealing with things out, trying these new things out, finding out that these are better at the end of the day. So I believe this is great what's going on. This induction stove, it's really great. And of course we also had other technologies in between. Now, this is much better. It is more, say, environmentally friendly. Because, all these changes also include a chance and opportunity. The ban of these ICE-powered cars. I believe it's a bit, say, strange or curious. We are now approaching 2035, and I believe we are going to have 8 million electric cars and 41 ICE-powered cars. Now the ban of ICE-powered cars. That's for new registration. My concern is that we will get something which I call the Havana effect. So just think about it. What do I see when thinking of Havana? I see a car with all these old-timers, these vintage cars. So the danger is, and this is what we observe these days, if people really continue using these ICE-powered vans, taking care of these cars, then you're going to have these cars for 50 years. So you're going to use them for a very long time. There's no politician who can, say, forbid these old vintage cars. This means 41 million old cars. If you allow the new ICE-powered cars, then of course they will be replaced by more modern ICE-powered cars, but they will not be replaced. We are going to see an increase in emissions. And the hope of the ban of the ICE-powered cars is that everything will become much more expensive, that you have the filling stations and the gas stations and things like this. But nevertheless, the probability is very high that we are going to preserve these old technologies. Therefore, I'm a bit skeptical. The classical way would be we talk about the CO2 price, we do this or that. Of course, that's difficult, but I must say I've got some understanding for what's going on. But nobody has been able to explain to me how I can get rid of these 41 million cars on the roads. So this is something which we do not really know. I don't think we need interference. I believe that we have to let the market say decide. If the German manufacturers, the European manufacturers are not able to handle that, then I can say that the Chinese will be able to handle all that. And once that happens, then, here people will also change to the, say, new technologies. CO2 price? Fossil fuels, all the prices will go up. This might be too expensive for people to buy such cars. Maybe some of these people still have some vintage cars, the IC powered cars. Everything's okay so far, but you see, the majority of people who have to do their sums, so to speak, they are going to change to the new technology if we allow them. Well, I'd be very happy if this really happens. Simons, I'd like to ask you. So if things are like this, then I can say if the more cost-effective cars are being offered, then everyone will get these Chinese cars. For me, the point is that this must be foreseeable. So things will not come to an end now, or we will not reach, say, the end of the development of, say, the car makers. If they see what's going on, then they are going to start reinvesting in the ICE powered cars. And then, of course, we have to buy the Chinese cars if we can't manage to do that ourselves. So for me, the question is very simple. Does it really make sense to forbid a technology? I should say no. And the question, and this is why the German industry answers like this, everyone, adjusted to this change, and this has to do with the fleet limits, and now suddenly things are changed again in political terms, and then, they start thinking about whether or not this really makes sense. Banning a certain technologies, but here we're talking about, a secure or reliable planning, aren't we? Say, today we say we are going to have this or that energy source, or that development prices go up or down. And surely we also have to make people understand whatever measures we are taking, whatever actions we are putting into practice. We have to agree, and this is the discussion we have, democracy and the state of law. That's not being discussed here. Certainly not. It's never been questioned. Now, looking at this cohort, I should say that everyone has been, say, driven or chauffeured in one of these electric cars. Well, you see a person, mankind is not just straightened out by any, say, good ideas, but nevertheless. The Netherlands, what do you think? What's the mindset there? ICE-powered cars, heating. Well, that's an interesting question. I can say that in Amsterdam, we've got something like a ban on ICE-powered cars. From 2030, you're no longer allowed to drive into downtown. And of course, this has an effect on, say, certain, say, taxation. There must be some incentives. It might be interesting to go to the city, even though I'm not allowed to drive into the city with a car. So there will be some kind of micro incentives, and they might solve one or the other say problem. We use some kind of bottom-up approach. We are experimenting with things. We also have got a new government, and they say there is no climate change. The climate is not changing. It doesn't matter. You see, they started, or the city started an image campaign. We want to be a green city. We want to raise your awareness, things like this. And this is what is considered to be some kind of strategy. You see, people are living in the city, of course, and this means we also have to take into account the various societal differences. So this is one of the bottom-up approaches. We have got charging infrastructure like you will never find in any other countries. And of course, the fact is, or it has to do with the fact that we've got the reliable planning. The old government said, we are going to put this into practice. We are going to realize this. And it was, if you like, accepted. Now, my view is it also brought about a few changes. Car sharing, parking fees. There are lots and lots of electric cars being offered for car sharing. And if you use that, then of course you need not pay for any, say, need not put any cents into the parking meters. I think we are right in the middle of a transformation phase. We fail, get up again, fail, get up again. We muddle our way through things, through the energy or the transformation of the energy policies. We're just thinking about it, and what is being said time and again, that is this. It's a bit paternalistic. You say acceptance of new technologies, and you can, of course, you can write about things and, promoting this or that. You can issue bans, yes. The question is, how can we handle all this in a fair manner? Let me open this issue and then throw the floor open for the audience to take part. One question, and we've discussed it over the last 2 days. We talk about this climate money. I believe that you know what this is all about. Now, what would be a perspective you'd like to share? Will this climate money help? And if not, then what would be alternatives? We are in this transformation phase. We come up with new instruments and tools. So what do you think? Well, you see, the climate money means that you've got a CO2 price, can be introduced much more easily if you tell the population you will get reimbursement. I don't know, higher CO2 price or whatever. But, the politicians are not feathering their own nest, so to speak, or use it for their own projects. No. In principle, it's a good idea, but I believe that this climate money is not the optimum instrument. It sounds good, yes, in the beginning, but if you think about it, then think about it. The same amount to each and every one. The idea is everyone will, say, have a reimbursement of about 200 euros every year. Sure, you can do that. But, why the same amount for everyone? The concern is that, some people might be overtaxed. From an economical point of view, there's something else. In the 90s, we had a similar debate. At the time, people said CO2 prices are good because we offer a double dividend. You improve the environment conditions, dividend number 2, and you can use this money in order to lower, say, kind of distorting taxes. Now, distorting taxes are things like, consumption taxes or what is called the excise taxes or things like this. So then fine particulates. So we lower the income tax. This means people start working, and then they will, have a second profit. But now they come back introducing this term climate money. This probably will mean that people work less. So this, in turn, will mean that there will be left less of this climate money, and, then, of course, fewer taxes will be paid, and there will be a huge gap in the budget. And as a financial expert, it's a bit hurting, I must say, because there's something which is evident, which is obvious. You want to improve matters, but you just leave it aside, forget about it. And, studies show that you will not get majorities because the pie is too small. I think it would be much better if you lower these distorting taxes, taking into account low income, say, strata of the society. Maybe you can give more to those at the lower end of this system. But, it's also about salience. Some people are a bit confused. Maybe they don't notice the income tax is lowered, for instance. But if I now have a new instrument, everyone will notice this. So this means you get 200 euros every year. And although maybe after 3 weeks you forgot about this anyway. But anyway, this is the idea. If you see and violate certain, say, ecological requirements, then this will not pay off. Meaning, people will become suspicious, lowering taxes and doing things like this.
I can go along with methods in order to make things more efficient. And of course, it is more efficient if you reduce the income tax rather than just paying out the money. It might be a negative stimulus. But at the same time, the question is, do people notice this? Is there really an increase in deficiency. We saw this when the VAT was reduced during the pandemic. What happened there? The question is here. We saw that there if we saw the reduction in income tax at the end of the year. So the question is, how much could it be? 0.2%? This would be a minimum amount. So this is something people won't even notice. So this is the question. When it comes to the distribution, I think this is also a problem. You just complained and you said, who's going to get these climate allowances? Will everyone get the same amount? Is it fair? Well, it's even more so when you take a look at income taxes and you have a reduction. Some would benefit more than others. Depends on how it's done, says Mr. Fist. Well, this is getting all rather complicated. But if we take a pragmatic approach, if you pay something out, a lump sum as climate allowance, then the question is the Minister of Finance has been working this on for a very long time. But, well, what can I say? This is something that takes forever, and if this is dependent on the income, well, that's another reason why we should not have a completely new transfer instrument. If you say we need it anyway, okay, but before you get this all carried out and set up administratively, I think you'll have lost a lot of money already. Well, that's certainly something we don't want, of course. That's why I think this has to be organized. I think it's high time we saw that all of this is quite a problem. And this, of course, is very important. In other words, we can say that this is something that you can see that you'll get the money back. But the question is it enough money for people to really notice it if you pay it out once a year, a certain amount once a year? You might have forgotten about it a couple of days later. Is it once a month? And that's really the question. So we have a lot of discussions upcoming on this, but I don't think that this is the solution to go through the income tax. I'd like to talk about salience. This is something that only makes sense if this is something that makes sense. It's temporary and it's something that you have to see in conjunction with identity. When Latour died too early, he said there is a new ecological economic class. It cannot be considered left or right. And I'd like to turn to you. I think that you've also worked with Latour. Is this something that's going to develop this new identity, this new class, so that there will be acceptance of all of this, which is also just the opposite of looking to the left or to the right? What do you think? Well, an ecological class, as opposed to the different classes, because otherwise salience is rather volatile if it's not really part of you. Well, I see it like this. In the European elections 5 years ago at schools, climate was the topic number one. It was always number one in other surveys as well. This year, during the European elections, the situation was totally different. I'm not going to say it doesn't play any role at all at schools, but it's much, much less than in the past. So what exactly is the reason for this? I don't know. We had Corona. Of course, this caused some rethinking, and they had other concerns that were more important to them. We had the Russian attack on Ukraine, which also threatens us and makes this much closer to us. So maybe we have different priorities. The media have begun behaving somewhat differently. Very young people see that TikTok plays a bigger role than for those students at universities. And so other things are shown, they focus on other things. And I still think that most people, irrespective of how old they are, they're willing to change. And as far as costs are concerned, this is an important aspect, and it has become more important than before. Climate goals are becoming less important if I am concerned primarily about being able to do my grocery shopping or my kids' education, if I can afford any of these things, or if I'm concerned about having an apartment or finding a house. I think most people, the way I see things, can react allergically, and this is two things. First of all, if all of this is also preached in moral terms. We're not going to say tomorrow it's going to be 26 degrees, and that means much too warm for this season, this year, this time of year. And I think also if there is a contradiction in politics, climate policy or energy policy, if you're involved there, what we need is we switched off nuclear energy, and some days we can see the most polluted electricity, and it's much more expensive than in the United States, or also the methods of measuring this for combustion engines or electric cars, and they don't take a look at the overall life cycle of the vehicle. So people feel that they have to pay more, but something's not okay when it comes to the politics behind all of this. So I don't know if there's going to be a new ecological class. I don't really see that, no. Well, let me be brief. I agree with you on the most part, but there might be an ecological class in the center of the city of Berlin, maybe. But there is an interesting idea behind all of this. Latour and Schulz, they wrote a little book a few years ago, and they said that in addition to left and right, there is a commonality. We have to produce more to give it to someone and to distribute all of it. The ecological class would say, no, we just have to have more throughput in the society, something that just cannot work. You can argue about that, but that is the basic idea behind all of this. I don't know if there is such a class. Maybe I belong to this when I tell you about told you about my song from the 1980s. But let me tell you the following. 65 countries were studied with 140,000 respondents, and they asked, would you be willing to take on more emission-free activities, all sorts of continents and cultures, and the question was, what do you think the others think? And they say, I think that 40% of the people would be willing to do so. That's interesting because if we estimate this, we can see how we all tend to agree. It is necessary, in other words. But the problem is that if we talk about political measures and argue about these measures, you will see that there are a lot of technical considerations, and most people don't understand this, and they don't understand the toing and froing in the discussions. So as you said before, we need to be straightforward, we need to be clear, and if you take a look at the expectations, then industry and innovation can work. We talked about entrepreneurship last night. A lot more has to happen in terms of taking on responsibility, but the conditions need to be clear. If we continue to talk about internal combustion engines for the next 20 years, yes or no, then I think that that's not a very good idea. And let me add one thing. We have all sorts of questionnaires when we talk about climate protection, etc., and all these figures. And if it talks about, we would say the figure might be 20%. That's what's difficult here. Making people think it will all happen automatically. Then you come with the law on heating in Germany, and people say, oh, I'm going to have to pay money to get rid of my old heating system. But I think we have to be honest here. If we talk about floods, and then they talk about, don't we need to have mandatory insurance? Yes, we do, because they're huge costs, and these are being put on the shoulders of the taxpayer. But if we confront people with all this, okay, for climate protection, we need this, of course, and we need this measure. This is something that needs to be paid for. And then, of course, when we talk about a mandatory insurance, then people might really stop and think about it. Well, I think if we say that this has nothing to do with it, this is when we talk about, but the costs, the impact costs us, and these costs have to be, we have to remember that we have more, but it doesn't matter how much we emit here in Germany. But each individual has to feel it. They don't feel a lack of money in the federal budget, but they have to feel it themselves. But this is a question of adjustment. Now, the professors would now like to open up the floor to the public, to the audience for discussion. We need a microphone, please. The answer to the question is yes, it's very expensive. But of course, you can use something else. You can use methanol. And the combustion technology is excellent. We've got the know-how. We just have to change the fuel. Well, of course, we talk about e-fuels, and we know that their efficiency is much worse. And that was the joke I said before. And we can also go and buy something in at the pharmacy where things are very expensive. Some people might be able to afford it, others will not be able to. So this is not a method to replace this. So when we talk about bio or organic fuels, this means that we are not producing food. We have agriculture, which is much too expansive. We've got all of the problems that agriculture has, and that's what we have. These are issues which will not help solve the problems with our climate. Well, I think that I cannot agree with you because we have markets and then we have industrial developments and then the prices will go down. But now the cost for energy, we have to consider that as a, and that second follow up was a second question. I think just one question per participant, please. It's a question of the efficiency. This is much worse that with electromobility. And we had some tests in Chile with Porsche and others producing e-fuels. We have 800 windmills. I think they would meet 1% of our needs. So that's good for the old timers and Porsche. And this would not be the solution for e-fuels, at least the current status of state of affair. And when we talk about efficiency, this is something that has to change. One quick question and one quick answer, please. Torsten Hütte, I'm from Munich. I have a real quick comment. I have an e-vehicle, and it's a totally different driving pleasure that I have with my car. I can just confirm that it really is a pleasure to drive my e-vehicle. That's a question. Now my question, energy storage, and we talked about that already. Now we talk about more days with negative energy, but did we miss something, or are we working on these measures? Maybe you could give us a brief answer to that question. Well, I cannot recall any or give you any studies, but from discussions I can confirm what you say. First of all, discussions with people who are building up the storage capacity with solar panels and also the wind farms that have been set up, and it's their business model. They want to have storage capacity and expand all of this and feed that into it. And we had someone with us last night who is involved in the business for expanding electricity when it's less expensive and to then save it and store it and when it's not so expensive. So there is some entrepreneurial potential, and this is happening in Germany as we speak. As I said, we don't have a study on this yet. We haven't the documentation on that, but discussions that I have and are actually going on. Okay, I see that somebody has to ask a question. We heard from Gernot a lot of enthusiasm and yes, we can attitude, but now it sounds less yes, we can. So for the panel, are you optimistic if we want to leave this event with optimism, or are we overly complex? So typically German. I'll take that as a final question for each and every one of you. Well, we all have a German passport, don't we? Well, I am optimist. Even if you take a look at international aspects, we have, first of all, people that say that the global south will also have to be reimbursed to a certain extent, and it's not only the R value, but other places as well. What would we have seen 5 or 10 years ago? You would never think that things like this would have happened. So that's good that now people know what's happening. We have all sorts of positive findings, and for the first time they talk about fossil energy to store it in the soil. And then we see that this is something that we didn't need in the past because it was a topic that was not even discussed. So we can see that there is some polarization, and this is a sign. It can be a sign of change. So we are now in the middle of the transformation. Maybe it is not properly controlled, but we have seen a lot of elements and identified these elements as to how we can also achieve a world that is free, just, and sustainable. It's learning by doing. We don't get all the answers to that, but I think it's much better than we actually think it is. You might disagree politically as well. Climate change, left and right, is that left or right? Well, the answers to that can be left or right. But I think what's important here is for everyone to assume responsibility and to say we also have to work on these goals and discuss these goals, because if we don't agree on that, then we're not going to achieve these goals at all. Only together will we be able to achieve these goals. I think the automotive industry has shown this. Yes, we can. They developed the technology. Truck manufacturers have battery electric vehicles that are now available. They will be delivered next year. And that means, yes, technologically we can. And of course, we will also have to see to it that we don't want to make it look bad again and again. Say, oh, maybe not, maybe not. That's why I am very disappointed if they talk about going back. No, I think that's what destroys the efforts that we've put into things. We have to keep on a straight line, and then I think we will achieve a whole lot. Well, for me, I learned from Gernot something that he didn't say. We're setting up an island in the United States, and here we're going to slow down the economy and reduce CO2 emissions. We're going to focus on technology developments. I think this is a promising path. If we want to be climate neutral in Europe, this is important because the other topics, there will be having even more emissions, and I don't think we'll see a reverse. Before I see such a reverse, maybe in China, maybe it will work there, but I think we need to do more in terms of technology. We need to develop attractive technology, and this is beyond climate protection. Maybe you want to have more e-vehicles in Amsterdam because they're not as loud and not as damaging to your health. So we have to produce attractive technology, sell them globally. If we don't earn money, that's what we don't want to earn that much money. What we want is to have them used. We want to roll them out worldwide. That's the only chance we have to make a contribution to climate change. So, of course, I agree with that presentation. In other words, the whole idea that if we were to have very expensive possibilities to reduce CO2 emissions, but the solution is in technology. Right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We've saw these professors and how they see life in general, not just in front of a lecture hall. I would suggest we can also consider that Sisyphus was a happy individual. Thank you to all my colleagues, and thank you for your attention.